welcome. This afternoon, we have a guest speaker presenting on his most recent book. Before I introduce Professor Christian Slowinski, let me just tell you that I am Ruben Hernandez Leon. I am professor of sociology at UCLA and a director of the Center for Mexican Studies at the Latin American Institute, and we are hosting the event that it's about to start. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome my friend and colleague, Christian Slowinski. I will say a few words about his academic trajectory, and we will yield the floor to Christian so he can present his most recent and very, very relevant and interesting book, entitled Made in Baja, The Lives of Farm Workers and Growers Behind Mexico's Transnational Agricultural Boom. Christian has a PhD in cultural anthropology, UC Santa Barbara, if I remember correctly, and he is the director of the Center for Mexican American Studies at the University of Texas at Arlington. He's also associate professor of sociology and anthropology at the same institution, and he is the editor of the UC Press journal Mexican Studies Estudios Mexicanos, and I have the pleasure of collaborating with him in that space as an associate editor. So it is, again, my pleasure to welcome all of you and to welcome our distinguished presenter, Professor Christian Slowinski. Christian, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. First of all, I want to thank Ruben Hernandez de Leon for the kind invitation to share my work with you this afternoon, and to the Center for Mexican Studies at UCLA, as well to Brian Pitts, who's helped to put us together on the Latin American Institute. So I'll be talking about my book, Made in Baja, this afternoon, and I'm gonna, for that purpose, I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm gonna start, and please let me know if when you can see there. So if you can see it on your screen, is it there? Yes, okay, thank you. So this is a book, a work that studies both the ecological and social impacts of the system of export agriculture in northern Mexico, particularly in Baja California. And, you know, we are living in the times of COVID-19, and in that context, the issue about the essential workers, that's those who produce the food that we eat, has become, you know, it's become more visible. So I think that talking about where that food is produced in northern Mexico, particularly fresh produce that we eat and consume here in the States, would be relevant. So to situate first the place where I have done my research, you live in Southern California, in LA, so you probably are familiar with the area. But in any case, the San Quintin Valley is a region that is located about 300 kilometers south of the US-Mexico border. Driving there, it's a beautiful scenery, both when you go to Highway 1, as later after Ensenada, you go to the mountains. It's a very beautiful place. As a matter of fact, I think that many people, UC San Diego, UCLA, on a spring break venture there. This year will be more difficult, but you know, it's a go to Baja, so that is in the way. Let me show you a closer look at which shows the four delegaciones or districts that make the San Quintin Valley. from north to south, Punta Colonet, Camalú, Vicente Guerrero, and San Quintin. And what you see in this map are on the left side along the coast are where the population where people live, the so-called colonias, rural communities that most of the farm workers and other residents in the valley live. And the fact that they are living close to the coast, far away from the sources of water on the mountains on the east part of the region will become it's relevant as I will show you later in the talk. But that's a close-up of the region where I did my study. This is a system that of transnational agricultural production that developed in the region since the 1980s, and that became with time specialized on the production of fresh produce, particularly tomatoes and berries. Tomatoes dominated since the 1980s through the 2005 or something like that. And then berries, both conventional and organic berries, started to grow up and take more and more land, especially since large transnational corporations set up roots in the region. That is the case here, as you have on the slide of Driscoll, that company that moved there in 2003. It had started before in Jalisco, but moved in 2003 to produce berries. So with time, this became a model dominated by large corporations, which was not the case before. Before you had many local farmers and mid-sized companies, but with time they were displaced by these large companies. In terms of labor, most workers originally came from some of the poorest areas in Mexico, particularly in southern Mexico. We are talking about the states of Oaxaca, Guerrero, Puebla, lately in Chiapas. And those are indigenous workers who started to come to the region since the late 70s, and then in much larger numbers in the 80s and 90s. The Mixtecs were the first to arrive in large numbers, and later you will have Triquis and Zapotecs coming to populate the region and looking for job opportunities that were expanding there. And from the onset, I have to point out that water historically has been the most important limiting production factor for agriculture. This is one of the most arid regions in Mexico that receives very little rain. And the Mexican government, since centuries ago, since independence, wanted to populate the region and develop commercial agriculture, but always battle or face the scarcity of water. Okay, and that started to change in the 70s and 80s when commercial agriculture began to take root in the region. So in the book, what I do, or some of the key goals that I address in my book, is first to analyze, deconstruct, discuss the workplace regime of export agriculture, and to look at what has been the changes in the production system and labor arrangements that this model of export agriculture has brought, and what has been the impact on the workers that are employed in this sector. I also examine and address the question of what I call the political ecology that allow and propel the production of water-intense crops, because berries and tomatoes demand a lot of water, not just a lot of quantity of water, but quality of water, in one of the most arid regions in Mexico. How do you explain that? What were the factors that led to that situation and to that system? And also, in the book, I document the effects of this export agriculture, both on indigenous farm workers in the workplace, but also in the local communities where they have been settling since the 1980s and building their own local communities or colonias. So my book, as I'm an anthropologist and ethnographer, I want to look at their lives, understand their lives, not just as workers, but also as resident citizens of these regions, of this region and settlers. So in today's talk, I want to touch on three parts of the book, or three themes that I discussed throughout the book. First, I want to say a few words about the labor regime that prevails in this agro-export enclave. The San Quintin Valley has become perhaps the most technologically advanced and one of the most productive agro-export enclaves in Mexico. Number two, I want to address and talk a little bit about the experience of workers beyond the workplace as settlers and what has been that like for them. And number three, I want to address this issue of the ecological and social impacts of growing these crops in this arid region and how it has impacted the communities there. My presentation today is going to be more descriptive in nature. I won't get into much theoretical analysis, but just to give you a sense of what the book is about and some of the things that I cover throughout. So I want to start here with describing the production system that has developed in the region. And I start with the concept of David Harvey's, the technological fetishism, if that's how you pronounce it. That basically is the idea that the logic of capital accumulation leads to technological fixes, as he called it, that are decoupled from their environmental and social consequences. In other words, the logic of capital accumulation whenever faces a crisis is to come up with a technological innovation, so to keep the system going regardless of their social and ecological impacts. And I think that that's a good concept to get started in this discussion, because what happened in San Quintin is when commercial agriculture arrived in the 1980s, they started to, unlike California, where you live, that there is an irrigation system and infrastructure, agriculture and horticultural production in San Quintin depends on the watershed, on the water in the subsuelo, on the aquifer. And so commercial agriculture and the companies started to use the water of the watershed through water wells, doing developing and water wells throughout the region and using water in a very intensive fashion. And what happened is that in such a way and intensively that by late 90s, the watershed was dramatically depleted. Many of the water wells were dry. Many others had water, but was too salinated to be used for these crops. And so at that point, at that time, many people thought that that was the end of the valley, and they knew it. But these transnational corporations decided to invest in technological innovations to address that problem. And they did that by what I call these two twin technologies, which are desalination plants and greenhouses. Desalination plants allows you to grow more produce per area of land, but also to grow that under controlled environmental conditions, and to more germane to the discussion here, to make a much better optimum use of, this is greenhouse production of water. So in greenhouses, you can control and optimize the use of water. And so what they did was to build desalination plants to treat that water of the water wells. and then grow the produce in greenhouses and shade houses. Just very much looking like the Mediterranean agriculture that you see that has developed in southern Spain since the 1980s. And as a result of that, the landscape of the region changed dramatically. There was a transition from open field to indoor agriculture, what is called indoor agriculture. That can be, either greenhouse or shade house. And the pictures here show you how much of the valley looks like today. We discovered indoor agriculture system. The picture there, you see workers in a tomato greenhouse that I took during my field work there. And I refer that to agricultural technoscapes that transform completely the landscape of this region. That system brought what I call a new labor regime, those two twin technologies, in a number of ways. Well, first of all, it did allow the year production of fresh produce. That is, it extended the window during which you can grow those crops. Before then, in open fields, maybe you could there have 7 months or something like that, depending on the season. With this system, many companies now operate, 10, even 11 months a year, producing all sorts of fresh produce. So that increased the productivity of the companies. But also it opened opportunities for workers to have year-round employment or almost year-round employment and settle down on with their families. Before, many of them were migratory workers, going around, and after they ended up in the late summer working in San Quintin, they will go to Sinaloa to similar production. Many of them will cross to the US to be employed in agriculture as farm workers, often as undocumented workers. But with this change and opportunity to have employment almost throughout the year, many of them were able to settle down, and something that they really like, because they could provide more opportunities, for example, for their children to attend a school, and for them was a good thing. But also this new production regime led to what I call a much more strict labor discipline and the intensification of work. Because once the companies start to invest in these very capital intensive technologies, they wanted to be as productive as possible and kind of put pressure on workers to meet their quotas and productivity. So one of the ways they did that was through what I call the good agricultural practices, or GAP. Those are rules that exist not just in Mexico, but also in the US, to regulate sanitation, toxic, pesticide, conditions in the workplace, as well as workers have the personal hygiene and appearance, how they show up at work. And those are important regulations, because without complying with them, companies cannot export their produce to the US, right? So they started to implement these rules, and when I talk about personal hygiene appearance, they will look at how long the hair could be. Women workers have to comb their hair, the nails, what they couldn't wear any bracelets or anything. So all that was on the name of the hygiene of production. But along that, what companies did was also use that as to institute what they call a quality policy, in which instead of trying to in which the emphasis was in increasing the quality production and to instill in workers the values of efficiency, productivity, and individual responsibility. In other words, to, as I say in Mexico, ponerse la camiseta de la compañía, assume the identity of the company, be loyal to the company, and work as hard as possible, often under the system. And so they brought this philosophy to the workplace. So as a result, what I say there here, Gab, created a new workplace regime with intense surveillance and labor control, particularly in indoor agriculture. The pressure is there to be as efficient as possible. Here you have the picture. Verimex is the subsidiary of Driscoll in Mexico. And then Monsanto, they are also moved to the region to produce seeds and in a large extension of land. And the result of this new quality policy was show up in workers. And I want to show you the quote of one of the workers, Esther Chavez, how it felt to be in this context in the workplace. And so this is a quote. She was working for Monsanto, and that's how she will describe the companies that will give workshops on a daily basis to workers to absorb these values. So she said, the supervisors aren't called supervisors anymore, but now we call them our clients. That was the policy. And she said, my duty is to satisfy my client with my work. All this is contained in the quality policy the company teaches us when we are hired. The policy has several goals. The first goal is to deliver our products on time. The second goal is to increase our efficiency or productivity. We need to increase the quality of our work every day we work. Every day when we arrive, she's told me in the morning, they give us a plática, kind of a talk, and they ask us, hey Esther, what is the first objective of the company's philosophy? Sometimes they catch us in a blank and we don't know what to answer. Every third day, they keep repeating these principles, and we have to memorize them. So this is, this quote is to convey a little bit of a sense of how these gap regulations and these quality policies penetrated all the way down in the workplace and shape the experience of workers that were employed with them, putting in, increasing pressure and increasing the intensification of work. And in the book, I describe how that happened. However, or in addition to that, what I do in the book is also describe how workers, after a number of years of this increasingly intensive workplace regime, began to develop different forms of labor resistance to fight back against this kind of ethos that have kind of arrived in the region when these technological changes took place. So in one chapter of the book, I describe different forms in which workers organize to resist or fight back. So what I show, or my argument, is that as war became more intense with time, workers develop forms of labor resistance to confront what they call the carrilla in the workplace. Carrilla meaning always having the supervisors on their backs, telling them to work better and faster, kind of. So I document different forms of resistance. Here are named just two. Plantones, or work stoppages, are very common, and workers use them. They are company-based, or even work crew in a particular field. At some point, they will stop working and say that demand that either the wages go higher, or that the work task, the amount of work that is required to be paid, piece rate is goes down, or any other labor benefits. And they get organized, different work crews, and negotiate to get that done. In addition to that, labor strikes have been also common in the region throughout time. But a major labor strike that probably many of you might remember took place in 2015, when thousands of farm workers in San Quintin decided to stop working. They closed the Highway 1 that is used to transport the produce from Baja to all the way to the US through the border. And many of the companies had to stop working, and they decided that they wanted to have a negotiation directly with the growers and the state representatives to improve working and living conditions in San Quintin. That was in 2015, and that caught the attention of the media, not just in Mexico, but also in here in the US. In California, there were LA Times news about it, editorials wrote about it. The New York Times also had a story there. Even it was even captured in Europe. So that was a major labor strike in 2015. And one of the major demands of workers, in addition to have better wages and working conditions and less pressure in the workplace, was the ability to develop their own labor unions. And particularly, they were fed up and very tired of what in Mexico is called sindicatos charros, corporate unions or white unions, that for decades, that since the 1980s, the two more powerful are the CTM and the CROM. These labor unions, with the back of the government, were signing collective contracts between the growers' associations and the unions without any knowledge or involvement of workers. And so workers were involuntarily not even knowing part of the union, and they were not part or consulted whatsoever for these collective contracts. So one of the major demands in the labor strike of 2015 was to have the right to form their own independent unions. And that was led by what is called the Alianza, that brought together many of the leaders, labor leaders in the region. And after negotiating with the growers associations, with some of the most important companies, transnational companies there, and the government, they were finally able to gain the right and form two independent labor unions. And one of them, what I did was they started to develop connections, transnational connections with other independent unions in the US, some in California and others in Oregon and Washington, where many of these indigenous workers or their families do work. One example is Familias Unidas por la Justicia in Washington. So they started to compare labor conditions, wages, and everything, and to organize. And that was, brought a lot of fresh air and innovation to the labor movement in San Quintin. Here is a picture of one of the major leaders, Justino Herrera, who has been there for many decades in San Quintin. In the book, like I say, I not only study workers in the workplace, but I want to, I kind of reflect, document their lives beyond there as settlers. And one of the things that came as a result of this system of export agriculture that produced almost year-round, like I said, was the ability for them to settle down in the region. Many of them were, like I said, temporary workers, and as such, they used to live in labor camps. With this new system of production, they were able to move to colonias to build their own homes, often with their own hands in scratch, but develop and have much more freedom and independence. So that's what I document in one chapter of the book, is how, as workers move from labor camps to colonias, they gain that residential emancipation, that freedom. And that I describe that as a process of placemaking, one by which they develop a sense of belonging, a sense of attachment to the land. Many, again, coming from southern Mexico, many from Oaxaca, will see San Quintin as their new home, as a place of hope, as a place in which they could offer better opportunities for the children, as a place where they could finally have some stability and have their own homes and have control of their own lives. So that was a very important experience for many of them. Here in the picture, I show how they would come together to celebrate the children's birthday parties and other social occasions. The picture down is in another colonia where workers will get together and build a community center to have their meetings and social celebrations. So I describe this as a collective experience that infused farm workers and their families a very important sense of freedom, of pride, and hope. Pride because they themselves, with very little help from the government, were able to develop those communities. And it took a lot of hard work. They will do that, build their homes, literally speaking, after coming back from the fields. And it would take them many years to do that, one room at a time, and savings and working with their own hands. But in the end, they could see the fruits of the labor. And so that is kind of ingrained in many of the residents, especially those that arrived since the 1990s. And to show you that, I have a quote of one of the workers who arrived there in the early 90s, who will kind of describe, I think that captures that feeling well. His name, Agustin Mejia. So looking back, he lives in a colonia that is called Colonia Santa Fe. He said, "We felt we were working for something worthwhile. And despite all the sacrifices and missing many basic things, because there were very humble homes, we had our own lots and place. And we began to love this land, to love our small parcels, our own homes, even though they were humble. We told ourselves that this was ours and nobody would take it away from us. And little by little, we started to get ahead. Little by little, we began to see the results of our efforts, even if it took a long time." So that is to convey what I saw, that sense of accomplishment that many farm workers, especially the old timers, had about what they have done after many years of living in the region. So I do capture that in the book, but building new rural communities didn't took a high toll on them. Okay, because like I say here, settling down came with a high price, as workers must provide their own housing. Before, companies would put them in labor camps, but now the responsibility shift to the workers and their families, and to the government to provide their services to these new colonias. So workers have to build their own homes, very humble, as you can see in this picture, cardboard, plastic, whatever they could put their hands on. But also they will have to mobilize in the colonias and ask the government to bring the basic public services. these colonias, many of them didn't have electricity, water, no schools, no payment. So they will have to press the government, negotiate to start bringing some of those basic services to their communities. And often at the heart of that social organization, community organizing, community mobilizing were women, who were the heart of a lot of those efforts in most of the colonias that developed over time. So I showed that in the book, and I also show how with time, many workers started to become engaged in new forms of labor migration. So let me take briefly a step back. When job opportunities become more stable, many workers will settle down, and they will combine working in San Quintin with labor migration, sometimes to other regions in Mexico, other times to the US, particularly California. But when they have to be invested in building their homes, often they will stay put there. But with time, and with this new very strict labor regime, and the fact that wages didn't go up, and the increased cost of living, living in the border and housing, many of the workers felt pressure to look for alternative forms of labor migration. With the militarization of the border, it was very difficult, risky, and costly to go back and forth to California. And but after a while, many of these workers started to be recruited by U.S. companies and growers under the H-2A program, which allow companies to bring workers from Mexico and other countries as temporary laborers for between 3 months, 9 or up to months a year. And having these workers develop a lot, being trained in these new production technologies that are very similar to what is used in California, Oregon, and Washington, because many of the companies are the same, they become good targets for these labor recruiters, and that will come to the region and bring them, because not only they were very good workers, but also they have their homes and their families, so they pose low risk of staying in the US as undocumented workers. So here you have a picture of one of the companies, the first one that opened an office there in 2007, Sierra Cascade Nursery, that grows berries and other produce in Northern California. That was one of the first ones. And today there are at least 3 or 4 companies that have offices there year-round or others part of the year to recruit workers. So with time, what happened is that San Quintin not only became specialized in the production of fresh produce to export those produce, but also to export the very workers that produce them as temporal under this temporal program. Last, I want to briefly touch on the ecological consequences of growing these export crops in this region. As I said before, many of the companies started to invest in desalination technologies and plants because the water had become too salty and to grow these very crops that require a lot of high quality water. So here you have a picture of tap desalination technologies. Some companies have large desalination plants, others have smaller ones. And then the water is put in the what is called water reservoirs that you have in the picture down. And that water is used to to feed the crops normally in those greenhouses. This liquid is highly valuable. You cannot enter these water reservoirs. They are protected, and they look like true oases in the middle of such a very arid region. And they weren't there again. They developed since the early 2000s, again changing the landscape configuration in the region. But what I document in the book is that this system brought or increased water inequality in the region. So it fostered new forms of inequality, which I document is differential access to water. Because agricultural companies were able to increasingly rely and invest in these technologies, but the workers, the colonies where workers live, wouldn't have access to this water. In fact, the intensive use of water for export agriculture further depleted the water wells that are used to provide water to the colonias where residents live. So, you know, this is what I call agricultural waterscapes. That's another, you know, picture I took in the field of this process, how the water comes there, and then producing kind of river look, you know, things there. Really amazing seeing this in such an arid region. So this is what they have, and I contrast. I want to show you this very what I call the inequity in how water is used and distributed in the region. So this is, well, it's in Spanish, the volume of extraction of water and on the different uses. So if you see on the left, on the green, agriculture absorbs more than 93% of the water in the region. And only about 6% is used to provide water to the about 100,000 people who live in the San Quintin Valley. Okay, so that shows you the inequity and the distribution of this very limited, scarce resource. But I also want you to take a look to this other picture of the region, and you will see that the green dots are the water wells that are mostly used for agriculture. Okay, and the red are the water wells that are used for provide water to residents. And so what happened is that as water became more scarce, many of the large companies, well, actually the little water that comes from rain, it rains in the mountain, in the San Pedro Martin mountain, and then, you know, goes underneath and then flows all the way down to the wells. What happened is many of these companies started to build aqueducts to gather the water from the origin on the San Pedro Martir to get them directly to their fields. Often, you know, hundreds of kilometers moving water from one aquifer to other, which is not allowed by Mexican law, but they were doing that anyways. And in so doing, they were preventing the water to flow down to the water wells or the colonias where workers live. So that made this problem of water scarcity even worse. And so what happened is that, well, you have these agricultural waterscapes. You have what I call Colonias Aridscapes, in the sense that water became even less a common resource in the districts where people live. This is some of the colonies, how they look like, you know, and this is, you know, how farm workers often transport themselves by bike or walking. But this is what it looks like. Most of them don't have pavement. Many don't have pipe water. And those that have pipe water, it's not that they have water every day. Actually, what happens is with time, they receive less water. So normally it's 2 or 3 days a week, and only about 3-4 hours most a day, often in the evenings. So as a result of that, what I show in the book is the workers increasingly struggle to have access to water for their most basic household needs. Even those colonies that have pipe water, okay? So it become a very hard resource to get your hands on. I also document how in the region there are more than 60 desalination plants 2 years ago for agricultural use, but not a single one for human consumption. And so the inequality to access to water has generated what I call different forms of social unrest and what I call water riots, meaning that often many workers in the colonias and they will come together and go protest the government facilities to demand water to their places. And in fact, the strike in 2015, when workers were saying that they wanted better living conditions, they were mostly often referring also to access to water. So there were many water riots that preceded the labor strike of 2015 that shows how, this inequality in access to water. As a response of that, the government decided finally to come out with to invest in a desalination plant for human use with a large private multinational corporation. And they were supposed to open up that plant to deliver water to the colonias in 2017, but as of at least late last year, that plant hasn't started being functional yet. So here is a quote of someone who was reflecting about this water inequality that I met in one of these numerous meetings and protests of people in the colonias. He told me, there is an inequity in how water is distributed in the valley. I estimate that there are around 250,000 boxes of tomatoes being exported to the United States, and I see them as the equivalent of 250,000 boxes of water leaving the region without paying taxes. Meanwhile, as you could see, there are people who live here in the Colonia who don't get water in their homes. So that conveys the feeling of many people who fell of this water insecurity and they turned them into protest. So this is another picture of a colonial, I call Aridscapes. On the left, you see that's a house that have pipe water, but what I mean by pipe water is that they have to use the hose to get the water in, and then they fill these barrels to have water for the rest of the week, okay? And as you can see, everything is very arid, and they put the water and they often recycle them to make an optimum use of it. And here on the right, you have farm workers who eventually will go to Ensenada to protest and to demand San Quintin to have access to desalination plants. So this became a highly political issue. I think that I'm going to finish with some final thoughts, so we can open up for conversation. So what I argue is that export agriculture has created a new class of transnational farm workers who are trained in the skills of modern industrial agriculture. And so after decades of being trained, like I say, now they are also become transnational workers that are hired through this labor H2A labor program. But this system of export agriculture has also led to the extraction and transfer of limited water resources north of the border, or what, using an expression of scholars that specialize in the discussion of water, what I would call virtual water flows, meaning that that water is embedded in these fresh products that we consume here, and that's where the water is going and is being exported, is exploited, that limited resource there. And so my book raises questions about the long-term, both social and ecological sustainability of this intensive production regime that is very profitable for the companies that are there, but that had, have created opportunities for many workers and families, but also put them in a very hard spot. So I think that I'm gonna leave it there, not to probably have talked too much and gone over the time limit, but I think that then we can open it up now for your questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Christian, very much. A very interesting presentation and a very comprehensive project as you look at many dimensions of the lives of workers and the impact of this transnational agricultural production system on the lives of people, but also on the environment. So I invite attendees to this webinar to post some questions. We have a little bit of time, so I'm going to start with it right away. So Christine Van Glasgow is asking, what has happened to these workers under COVID-19 conditions?
Thank you. Great question. They've been badly affected. So what happened is that when COVID started to spread in the region, well, I haven't been there, so my information comes through the communication with the workers that I know. So at some point, many of the companies closed down, but later reopened. And workers started to get infected, and the problem is that there is no, sufficient hospitals or health infrastructure, so they had to be transported to Ensenada and other places. Many people have died or have get infected, and that is even though I haven't studied that, but there is evidence somewhere else in the US, at least in New York, that infection in greenhouses is particularly high. There is one case in the state of New York where workers, there were more than 300 workers that were employed in these large indoor facilities that got infected. So things are pretty hard right now for the farm workers there, and the prospects for them to get their vaccines are right now are not great.
Thank you, Christian. Fernando Torres Gil from UCLA asks, ultimately, do the benefits, work, new industries, new skills outweigh the costs you describe? What's to keep these transnational companies from leaving the region entirely?
Well, good question. First of all, these especially transnational corporations, when they invest large sums of money, is because they are not planning to leave anytime soon. They make plans, in the long term. So, you have to acknowledge on the one hand that the job opportunities have benefited workers, particularly those that are able to stay and stay put. But on the other hand, there are many things that need to be improved and worked out in terms of wages. Number two, in terms of labor conditions. Number three, in terms of affiliation to the Seguro Social, so that workers have access to health insurance. And number four, also in terms of control of the exploitation of water in the region, because companies are not paying for the water, and that's a very limited resource. So what is needed, I think, is more serious regulation by the government to make sure that that doesn't happen, and that this very profitable system of export agriculture filters better down to the workers and their communities, because the contrast has growing bigger with time, and that's very visible, very palpable.
It seems that you have at least partially answered our next question, which comes from Oscar Contreras, who's a PhD student here at UCLA in sociology, who asks, how are the local and federal governments regulating the use of water by these companies?
Well, it's good to hear from Oscar Contreras. I know him. Good question. One of the changes, major changes that took place that I haven't addressed here is that San Quintin finally, after many years of mobilization, has become un municipio independiente, independent municipality, the last one in Baja California, and was approved, I think, last year. And you know, things are still have to be worked out, but it will become an independent municipality. And the hope is that that will allow them to access more resources, but also have more control on how some of the natural resources are used, including water. So so far they have to push the state governments, who for many years in Baja has been the PAN, the right-wing PAN, that is always supportive of big agribusiness, and then the local governments. With being an independent municipio, I think that they might have more leverage to pressure them, but they will also have to, you know, I think, work with the federal government, because the water is a natural resource, and there are clear laws that are being violated in the use of water in San Quintin, because there is very little oversight of that.
Thank you. Philip Martin, our colleague at UC Davis, a labor economist who's a student, a scholar of the H-2A program, asks, do you think that many of the H-2A workers would elect to apply for immigrant visas? If the Farm Worker Modernization Act is enacted, it would allow H-2As to eventually become immigrants.
So my answer has to be speculative by default, right? And so, you know, I think that if what I've seen in the Valley is that with time, workers that go back and come back year after year, sometimes they start developing even relationships there, and they get to know their places. And if they feel and see that that might offer a better opportunity for their children, not so much for themselves, but for their children, they might want to do that. I have seen, for example, workers that once they become start going back, they are able to you know, bring, or the company will recruit also their relatives or children, and with time you could see that happening. On the other hand, you have many of them that have already investments in San Quintin, that use the money that they earn to build better houses, and also to invest in independent businesses, so they can leave agriculture altogether. And so for them, the option might not be to migrate on a, you know, long-term basis to the US. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays, particularly if the opportunities for these temporal workers, H-2As and H-2B, the program expand in terms of numbers here in the US.
Thank you.
Sorry, I can be more concrete.
Of course. Peter Reich, who's a colleague at the School of Law here at UCLA, says or writes, excellent presentation. Are there differences between labor conditions and ecological impacts on ejido versus non-ejido land? For example, does it make a difference if an ejido is exercising some control?
You know, for my knowledge on this region, the ejidos were never very hard, strong, sorry, here in the region compared to other parts in Mexico. And in fact, many of the ejidos that were formed to develop agriculture were able later to, especially after the agrarian reform in 92, to reclassify their lands because there wasn't enough water for agriculture. For many of the ejidos argue the federal government, let's reclassify this land so we can parcel out and provide land for workers to live, because we can't grow anything there. So, and often ejidos don't have the resources to invest in any technologies to provide them water. So what I have seen, this is something very recent over the past year and a half, some of those ejidos that were really struggling to provide means to the families that live there have established agreements with companies to rent their water wells, or to build the water so they can the companies can open up fields of production there. So that's how they are doing, because they the ejidatarios don't have the means, and the aid from the government for them is very limited. In fact, something that I show in the book is that a lot of the programs in Mexico that provide resources for technological developments ended up in the hands of very large companies rather than independent growers and mid-sized farmers. And that's what happened.
Thank you. Maria Elena Ramos Tovar, who's a colleague, a professor at the Universidad Autónoma de Nuevo León, asked, if binational union organization is taking place, as you mentioned, how are the owners and governments reacting to or against that form of binational organization?
So I guess that my answer is two parts. Well, yes, first, normally, at least, the companies don't like, with these transnational links are established, and some of the traditional unions felt threatened, right? So what has happened in San Quintin is that after the big hope of these independent unions, they really couldn't get a lot of leverage there and sign many workers because the growers associations and the companies were still favoring the traditional unions and providing them the ability to renew their contracts on their behalf. Now, as for the state of the Mexican government goes, as you know, AMLO approved a labor reform, I think it was about a year and a half ago or so. And within that, there is something to open up and increase, enhance, support the formation of independent unions. And so a number of people, not just in agriculture, but in other sectors, think that might open up some spaces to finally, if not break down, undermine the power of these traditional sindicatos charros. But that remains to be seen. One thing is what the new law says, but these traditional unions have revealed that they have tremendous power to keep their hands in hold of in many of these sectors.
And this is our final question. You partially, I think, answered that question already. Ruben Tapia is asking, are there being any responses on the workers' demands under the AMLO government? You sort of partially, I don't know if you want to expand a little bit more, or is there anything that you want to add to your answer?
To be honest, I don't know. The law is relatively recent. I wasn't able to go to the region last summer because of the COVID restrictions, so I don't have a strong feeling of what's going on. But what I have capture is one is still the power of these all labor unions that don't disappear and not gonna disappear anytime soon, and the struggles of these other independent unions to get support, but also on COVID-19 times, the priorities have shifted, right? And many of the workers are first priorities to have an income to sustain their families, but also to keep their health. So it's a pretty tough situation right now for many of them, and the H-2A program for many is it's a very good option if they can do it. So we'll see how it plays out, this thing of the ability to really strengthen these independent labor unions. Sorry, I can't answer be more concrete.
Thank you very much, Christian. I think that you're getting kudos from our audience. There, people are writing very impressive presentation. Thank you very much. Very illuminating, and I guess this is an opportunity to invite our audience to actually go and get Christian's book and take a look. Made in Baja is published by UC Press. Christian, you want to add something to that?
Yes, very shortly. Well, thank you everybody for your time and attention. I know that these virtual presentations can be tired, but I want to show this is the book, and I want you to know that if you buy the book, the royalties or whatever they are called, I set them so they will to set a fund for scholarships for the children of farm workers. A number of them, because of settlement, they can go to school, but if they want to continue, and some of them want to go to college, they don't have the support. So a scholarship is set up to do that. And so, if you buy the book, that that's where your part of your money will go. And sorry for the ad, for the promotion.
That's an excellent commercial. And on that note, I want to thank you, Christian, again for your wonderful presentation, very illuminating and comprehensive. And I want to thank Brian Pitts, who's our assistant director of the Latin American Institute, and is always here supporting with all the tech issues, the transmission on Facebook Live. And this is the last event of the winter quarter for us. We will begin the spring quarter promptly, just in a few days, with another event on farm workers. This will be a presentation on the experiences, the lives, the conditions that H-2A workers experience in the United States by well-known activist and journalist David Bacon, followed by a response from David Trouille, who's a professor at James Madison University. So stay tuned for the events organized by the Center for Mexican Studies and the Latin American Institute. Thank you very much.